everybody on this lovely Sunday night in January. We are the Blue Ridge Democratic Socialists of America, and we cover Roanoke, Salem, Roanoke County, Franklin County, Botetourt, and Craig counties. Um, and you will find our handle at Blue Ridge DSA. Uh, Next slide. We're talking about what is capitalism, the fundamentals, the basic structures, profits, capitalists and workers, class formation, all of that. So basically, before we start, I'm going to make some announcements. Now we have the general meeting coming up tomorrow at 7 p.m. We are going to be talking about, since it's also MLK Day, we're going to talk about his legacy as it relates to socialism, as it relates to bringing civil rights and workers' rights together so we can fight for an equitable future. Yeah. And we're also going to be talking about organizing conversation, the one-on-ones. People who are in rank and file union work might be familiar with that term, but it is commonality in connecting with people that it's great to talk about those things. So yeah, and then we're going to have starting Tuesday, January 26th at 6 p.m. We are going to have talk about bigger than Bernie, how we moved from the Sanders campaign to democratic socialism. We'll be reading chapters 1 and 2. And here is the cute little bit.ly I made for that event to sign up and get on it. There's also a link to the book in there. We will also have Micah Utricht, who is one of the co-authors on there. So I encourage you to read the first 2 chapters, but you don't have to, and I would love y'all to be on that call. And then lastly, for now, we are going to talk about the Mountain Valley pipeline cleanup at the Yellowfinch tree sit direct action resistance. It's this Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. You will find the information there, so please get signed up. This is our first co-event with the New River Valley chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, which covers Blacksburg, Christiansburg, Montgomery County, Giles, Pulaski, and Floyd, I think, is that. So they are just south of us, and like good comrades, we got to be connected in our area and be in this for the long term. So yes. Now the next slide. Okay, and just a quick overview on the Democratic Socialists of America. That's what we are. So socialism in America has been around. Don't let people tell you differently. And it's especially reoccurred thanks to Bernie Sanders for running in 2016. But our organization is a big tent, so we have different tendencies and viewpoints of what people think. We are democratically run. We were founded back in 1982 as a merger. And yeah, and it's very exciting where we're going. We're at about 85,000 members. I think we gained 1,500 over the events of, was it last week? Was it only just 1 week ago? Yeah, thing that happened at the Capitol siege, Capitol riots. Yeah, we gained 1,500 members. So yeah. Okay, and then next slide. And why do our members pay dues? Some of you might been a rank and file union member, some of you might not, but the reason we pay dues is for resources. Our power comes from organized people and organized money. We cannot fight the ruling class of our country if we cannot afford organizers, technology, and more. And some of the technology we have is we get Zoom lines, we get things like access to the VAN network, voter access network. And that's so we're able to canvass for whatever campaigns we have, whatever class struggle candidates we put forward. Um, this determines our independence, and we determine priorities throughout democratic processes. We do not have to worry about where the funding comes from. Despite what people might think, we are not funded by George Soros in his Bitcoin factory. Um, and that means we also have buy in. Members are committed to joining an organization and supporting it financially are far more likely to get involved. And DSA does, you can pay however much if you don't make a lot of money. So it is not something that is prohibited to working class people. So, yeah. So, our topic for today is what is capitalism? What does it impact? We're just going to talk about the very basics. We're going to talk about how it works, how it shapes the lives of workers, what is the relationship between the government and the capitalists, and how does capitalism affect culture and social relationships? So, the basic structure and mechanics. Okay, so basically, capitalism is the private ownership of the means of production. So, the means of production, you hear that word a lot, but it basically means a place where things are made, services are provided. So, that could be a factory, land, banks, hotels, restaurants. Um, so capitalists who own these means of production, they sell their goods on the market and workers sell their labor. And production is carried out for selling on the market. So when producers or workers make something, it's not for their own use. Like you see my mom knitting right there. She is not being um, a worker or a member of the proletariat or whatever, she is making it for her own consumption. She is not producing a commodity good. So the point is to sell it to somebody else. If my mom was working at the knitting factory, yes, that would be selling it for commodity on the market. So yeah. So typical form of employment is wage labor. People are employed by someone else. So a worker is employed by a capitalist. So Nora owns the knitting factory. My mom works there, and so do other people like Dylan. Self employment is a rare exception. And the labor that produces items is by people working for. So Nora is the capitalist who owns the knitting factory. My mother and Dylan are both the people working for a wage. And so how we have to think about this, wage, labor, and trade are the focal points of capitalism. So there's workers, there's capitalists. Nora's the capitalist, my mom and Dylan are the workers. Okay.
So are we passing this off here, Joseph?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So this is what? Let me pull up here. I have it other screen, not perfectly prepared. Okay, capitalism and workers. So in these series of slides, going to be going over the ways in which the capital class shapes the lives of insecurity. Among things go over is insecurity, wage suppression, labor extraction, and the sense of autonomy. Let's see how we this way. Sorry, because notes I've notes in the other in the slide, so you are patient. Thank you. So we have here with insecurity. The worker is in fact reliant upon the employer as they lack the direct access to the production. with the need for an employment being the sole means by which that they can maintain their livelihood. Um, with that though, the dynamic is that the employer, um, their primary goal, sole goal in fact, is to raise profits, not in fact the welfare of the employee. Sometimes it is possible that you can have a good boss, but a good boss still is interested in making money. Um, so the employer will hire and retain workers only when it is good for their bottom line. And the workers are not assured that they can sustain, and therefore workers not able to be assured that they can sustain themselves. So wage suppression. The primary goal of the employer and maximizing profits. Large part of all costs, wages, what you pay your laborer, what you pay your worker. And that reliance on wage for the worker to maintain one's livelihood will create the instability, insecurity, catfight here. Um, so when the employer seeks to reduce the costs by lowering wages or keeping them low, they're at the advantage. They can fire you. You lose your livelihood. And that's the balance of power is in their favor, so they can reduce your wages, keep them low. Okay. Next slide there. Oh, thank you. Converse to this is labor extraction, trying to get absolutely everything out of the worker as possible. That one of the concepts there, speed up. Probably many of us have heard, if you can lean, you can clean. It's for every moment that you are not actively working, to an employer, it feels as if it's a moment you have stolen from them. So you work harder, faster, and better. With that, you can be overworked. The more you work, the more they expect of you. No matter how, no matter, no amount of work is enough. The more you work, the more they will expect to meet that or exceed the same amount. Conversely, underwork. Not getting enough hours, issues like inconsistent work schedules, being on call or sent home, all result from the drive of the employer to minimize costs and therefore demand unlimited flexibility from the worker. Workers may need several jobs. And as all this leads to is lack of autonomy, being beholden to the needs for a wage to sustain oneself makes the worker subject to the demand of the employer. If the employer resists, they may lose their means to sustain themselves. Resulting from this, but not limited, is the need to have multiple jobs, sometimes with potentially conflictory schedules and demands. Learning the time outside of work, whether through overwork on one job or the need for multiple jobs as a result of underwork. As such, time for family, friends, and self-actualization activities, including gaining further skills and ability, is limited, if not entirely eliminated. The potential for bodily harm and injury. Working can be potentially unsafe in any field. There are profound risks in many fields as well. If the employer wishes to ignore the safety and well-being of their employee, the employee may jeopardize their livelihood by seeking to correct or account for these risks. Thank you.
Now I will talk about the profit motive. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce you to a little Marx original. It's called MC to M, the cycle of production that is observed in capitalism. So the original M represents money, or and then the C represents the commodity being sold. and M is what it brings back. If it brings back the same amount of money, my mom knits a shawl for Nora for $10, and then it's sold on the market for $10. Um, Wait, my mom knits one $10. It costs that much. My mom requires $5, and then it's sold on the market for $15. Well, in capitalist mindset, Nora will not like that. So, yes, she needs to get a profit. It's the delta M. So instead of selling it for $15, maybe she sells it for $20. Maybe she sells it for $25. Um, doesn't matter. So the capitalist requires an income as an individual. It's represented by that delta M. And delta M is the capitalist goal. It's what they live by, what they breathe by. It's in the pursuit of this that we can observe certain behaviors occurring consistently. And it informs all decision making. So, when deciding on wages for workers, a capitalist must keep in mind how much money a worker's labor will generate and how much of that is offset by their wages. A worker cannot make more than they generate, otherwise, there is none of that sweet delta M for the capitalists here. Because the capitalist is seeking that good old delta M, they must reduce costs. So instead of paying for supplies $10, they pay $7. Instead of paying my mother $5, they pay her $3, and they still are able to sell the shawl at $20, so then they get 10. I was just doing math in my head. I think that's right. So, yeah. And then government and capitalists. So the government in a bourgeois system, that means a government run by capitalists and capitalist adjacents, the, like in our originally set up constitution in America that limited democracy or direct democracy only to the House of Representatives. That changed in the 20th century. The Senate became direct democracy before state legislatures appointed them. And the president, as we can see with the 2016 election, was not by electoral college, Donald Trump won, but by actual raw numbers and data and votes, he did not. So, but anyways, the government's role is to secure property rights. It's to provide the legal framework for the accumulation of capital. It's to provide a sanctioned militia to protect investments. And it's to secure business interests through foreign relations. And so sometimes there is a revolving door, or as we can see, I think it's called K Street, where all the lobbyists are in Washington, D.C. But elected officials receive funding from capitalists in favor of policy concessions. And these same elected officials then work for those capitalists in high positions as payment for the favorable policies implemented. So if a crappy elected gets pulled the rug pulled out from under him or her or whoever, they can go work for a cushy job for, I don't know, a million a year, whatever. So the reason for lobbying is alternative avenue for capitalists to increase their profits and to squash competition and further consolidate capital.
All right. This one's me. So, for culture and social relationships, we kind of see that. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
that what we see is so obviously capitalism's in everything in our lives at this point. So, there's not much that we interact with that isn't affected by it. And so, what we kind of see is that people identify more as consumers than as workers or producers, and that creates a system where everything is a product and it all has to be driven by profit, as we've kind of discussed. And so that starts to include things like housing and utilities and medical care and the news media and social media and all these things we interact with on a daily basis. And some of them are things that are required for survival become something that you have to purchase. And inevitably, that causes all sorts of problems. And one of them is it divides people. So people with means are divided from people without means. And our ability to spend becomes part of the social hierarchy. So our culture and who we're friends with, what we're able to do becomes based on spending power. And that's kind of inherent to a system that is driven by profit like this. It's kind of unavoidable. So we also see that our the way we value people becomes tied to whether they earn enough and if they're providing profit for their employees. So we start to view things like money and wealth as a moral factor. And I mean, you hear it all the time. People are looked down on for being poor, for not having enough money. And often people think that, well, rich people work harder and have earned it, and the poor just haven't worked hard enough, and therefore they don't deserve it because it's a moral failing. And there's a fallacy that if you just work harder, you will earn more and you will have wealth and you will be successful. And that's just not true. We know that's a fallacy. Earning is still controlled by the people who already have the capital at this point. And I think like a good example of that is that I don't think anybody could realistically argue that, say, the CEO of a car company works harder than the person who's actually building those cars on the assembly line. It's just not true, but it's the way our culture kind of frames things. I think that's it for that one. And so it affects everything we get to do as well. So do you have healthcare? Do you have vacation days? Do you have sick days? Can you afford to take a vacation? If you get sick, are you going to miss your rent payment? All of this is controlled by the people that have the capital and are driven solely by trying to extract all the work from you that they can and make all the money that they can. So is there's no equity there. And a lot of people as well, if you had to leave your job tomorrow, would there be any stability in your life? Would you have stability in housing? Would you be able to make utility and rent and car payments and all the things that you're required to do, much less anything that you want to do? So we've talked about, autonomy and being able to kind of have a meaningful life. And a lot of that gets crushed by profit motive, like we've talked about. And it's controlled by the capitalists and the corporations.
So I'm going to talk about capitalism as a historically bounded system now. So capitalism has not always existed. It's not inherent in humanity. There have been other economic systems that have guided large-scale transaction of material goods. So I'm going to contrast it with feudalism, the era of knights and peasants and kings and vassals and so forth. So basically, the difference between modern day working class and peasants is peasants had access to land. That was their means of production, and they could produce for their own needs until the rise of industrialization. Um, and they produced enough for their families. So, and they would take the surplus to the market. So, what they were creating, what they were growing, was not intended primarily for the market. That's one of the big differences. So, more and more people lost access to the means of production. So, they lost access to the land. So, they were displaced. Like, I know in England that there used to be common land that people could have, and there were these small like wastelands or what wasteland they would call it. And basically, in the 1700s and 1800s, they were kicked off, so they were landless peasants, and and we see this similarly in America, like For example, when colonists came over here in the early 1600s, they slowly destroyed Native Americans, killed them with disease, genocide, all of that. Very cheerful topics, but yeah. And as a result, they were able to clear land, the colonists, for cash crops such as tobacco, cotton. And I mean, I don't know about you, but you cannot eat tobacco or cotton. And well, anyways, so with, and that's kind of the idea of cash crop, growing it to sell it on the market. So now these people are displaced. What is next?
Hey, Joseph, can I interrupt you for just a second? Imani just messaged me and said the recording stopped, and I have no idea how that works or what to do about it.
I thought her phone had died.
I don't know. She sent me a message that said the screen record isn't on anymore. That's all I know.
Is it shown for everyone else?
I see a record button.
Do you not see the slides?
No, I see the slides.
Okay.
I think, is it still? I don't know what that meant exactly.
Oh, yeah. So okay, so peasants are displaced, they're landless peasants, and in the late 1700s, we had the advent of the cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney. And so it was able to mass produce cotton. And you had big cotton mills in England and in the northeastern United States. So former peasants without the access or means of production like land, thrown off the land, had to find new jobs in factories like these. And capitalists rely on these workers to produce goods in factories. So consequently, there is a mass market for goods made by workers. There's a mass market, yeah, for goods like food, shelter, and clothing are sold to the market as commodities, not something seen as a commonly needed thing.
All right. So now we're going to talk pretty briefly about how markets have become kind of similarly to what Joseph was just saying. They're a site of domination of various classes of people at this point. And what we see is that the employers, regardless of where you are or what your job is, are the ones in the position of strength. So everything from the amount of hours that you get, the compensation you get, whether you have any job security or not, is controlled by the capitalists, and the workers do not have much power in that situation. So that means that, and we talked already about productivity goals constantly increasing, and it's the nature of markets. It's always going to be that way in a system where the workers don't have any power and don't have any autonomy. So you kind of, when you work for someone else for wage labor, you give up autonomy, and you work when they tell you you can work and for the amount that they tell you you can work. And as individuals, we have very little bargaining power. And similarly to how everyone is a consumer in this system, we have the means of production are all used by workers, and they have no access to what they're actually producing without buying it with the labor, with the wages that they receive for their labor. So it's an inherently unfair system. And so to counteract that, organizing workers is kind of, it's the only way to achieve any kind of equity in this system, because an individual worker is easy to replace, and from the employer's perspective, cheap to replace. So it's easier to just get rid of someone and bring in someone new than deal with someone who wants to be paid a fair wage. And that's what happens. Once workers organize, they gain more power over that dynamic, because replacing 300 workers, replacing your entire staff, replacing the entire factory floor is a lot more expensive and eats into a lot more profit than replacing individual workers as they complain. So it organizing brings some control over profit to the workers, and that's what the capitalists will pay attention to. So solidarity allows us to kind of improve the situation of everyone that's working and everyone that is working class. I think we skipped one of my slides. That one. Okay. So there's also, just as part of how employers dominate workers and why the markets are kind of a site of this and it's such a big problem, is that we see, based on social identity, whether it's gender, race, your sexual orientation, whether you have a disability, employers will use that to kind of try to divide workers. And whether that's, the gender pay gap, or whether it's people getting fired for their sexual orientation or never hired in the first place. Again, we see that individuals don't have any power over that decision making process from employers. And markets try to take advantage of that. And so if they can pay someone less, whether it's for, you know, because you're a woman or because you're some other marginalized group, they will do that. They will absolutely take advantage of it, as we talked about with profit motive. And so if we can create solidarity as workers, as a whole class, as everyone that is in this system producing, then that shifts the balance of power, and it helps marginalized groups and not marginalized groups. It helps everyone equally, and it's kind of the only way to organize on this kind of level, because the more we break it up into different classes, the less power overall that we're going to have. I think that's it for me.
Hello, Dylan here again. Excuse me. So, getting into class conflict. So some of there is a level of redundancy, it seems. That being said, going to go over sort of some of the individual versus collective resistance and some of the problems there, obstacles to the collective resistance, and then the some of the solutions to those problems. So with regard to individual versus collective resistance, individually, workers are limited in their ability to challenge the dominance of the capital class, that being the employer-employee relationships. So low-skilled workers always say, you need a job, go fast food, always hiring, because they can fire people very easily. Many jobs, that's the case, but that being said, most jobs, regardless, are, unless you have very, very specific skills, there is about a third of the populace as of last year, and according to the census, that has a four-year degree. College education is quite common itself. So on that, it's hard for any individual worker to have that much sway in that relationship. So if they are seeking some sort of better concession from their employer, easy enough to terminate the single worker. But together, it's when multiple employees, again, a bit redundant here, but multiple people get together and ask the same of their employer, the cost of replacing them goes up. And with that, the risk for the business to lose profits, which again, that's the goal of a business. Make money, and you can screw with that by working collectively. Obstacles there. So above all, it's the dynamic, the fact that the employer holds so much sway in the life and well-being of the worker. As such, it's too much as is at stake. You ask, you get fired maybe. And heck, furthermore, it's not uncommon people get fired for just talking about it. definitely some big news. One of the major companies in the country fired somebody talking about organizing. Um, so earlier in the summer, not enough protective equipment. They were trying to organize and they got fired. Um, Further to that, there's demand on resource. And sure enough, with organizations like ours, yes, money does happen, but it isn't always the most important. So further, it's time. Um, so there's the need for sleep and rest. Workers can definitely get, if you're working a lot, need time to rest your body, and time for your family, your friends, fun, things like that, that don't just feed your body, but feed your heart, your soul. And heck, beyond that, see my place, it's a mess. Time to clean. There's a lot of time needs on any individual. So further, there are those who don't want to. It's the folks who just want to wait and see, because there's so much potentially at stake. Folks who will just, I'm not going to bother with this. I'll let them work. I'll let them try and figure it out. I'll just wait and see. And if organizing ends up being successful, if you get union formed and you get concessions from your boss, concessions from the employer, well, they win. If you don't, and say a couple folks get fired, well, heck, they don't get fired. It's a phrase for that. They're free riding. Well, how do we change this? Forging solidarity by creating a sense of community and of mutual obligation. Do this to change the moral decision to one to join in, as opposed to the logical decision of free riding. Let other folks do it. Making a sense of responsibility and uh, community. It's I am fighting for my neighbor as much as for myself, as opposed to I am only out for number one. Those who I work with, they are my friends, my family, my cohort. They are not my enemy, my competition. Through this can be done with the building of institutions and other things to build on those common experiences. Among those things are clubs, newsletters, social groups. What we're doing here, a sense of solidarity can be built in this.
All right. So why did we just talk about all that? And it's because pretty much everything in our system is related to capitalism in some way. And being able to explain what capitalism is really important, because if you know what the system is, you can help organize against it. And once we organize, that gives us power to change things. So if we can actually unite people as workers and realize the power that they have as workers, then it helps to take the power away from the capitalists. And but it requires buy-in. So you have to understand it, and you have to be able to talk to people about it and tell them, why they're worth more than 7.85 an hour or whatever minimum wage even is now. Um, but it requires work, and so that's why we organize, and that's kind of, I think, what in a lot of ways DSA is trying to do, is get people organized, get people talking about it, and trying to change it. So I think that's probably pretty obvious to most of us in this seminar right now, but that was the point.
Any questions?
No, just listening for the most part. I have a question though, actually. For it was about solidarity. Sorry, I can't say the word.
Solidarity?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, solidarity. I think. How does that apply to currently? How does that apply currently? Because I think I missed something.
Well, solidarity is the act of just people of the working class standing together as a formation and presenting with clear demands and concessions from capitalists who they work for.
Okay.
May
And,
I add to that?
and it's also a way of understanding our differences and our commonalities to what we have in common. Yeah, and Xander put in the thing called class consciousness, and education is one of the first things to forming and having a class consciousness. Were you gonna say something, Dylan?
Yeah, may I add to that? So solidarity, at best I could give like a textbook definition, is a sense of community brotherhood, like commitment to my fellows. Say the this summer protests throughout the country. So, well, those are my brother's lives at stake. Those are my sister's lives at stake. And if I do not stand with them, who will stand with me? Um, there are a lot of different instances. It's that the fifth comes from labor and solidarity, and then is used for so many things because it is a sense of you are you are me, and I stand with you, and I risk myself with you.
Anything else?
Good question. Oh, there's chat.
So I don't have a question as much as I do have a comment, if that's cool.
Yes.
Okay.
Only if it's good.
Okay, we'll have to take a vote and determine whether or not it was good. So it's referring to what Ben was talking about with the culture and social implications of capitalism. So something that kind of struck a chord with me when he was talking about that is when I try to convince people to look into, this radical philosophy and whatnot. There seems to be this division regarding what defines success. I think we, especially people down here in the South, where as a region we have the lowest median income, highest unemployment value percentages and whatnot. I think we've been conditioned to believe that success is like having a roof over your head, being able to have clothes on your back and food in your stomach on a consistent basis. If you're able to do all of that, then you've made it, because you can live, and if you can go on vacations, if you can buy something, kind of splurge on something every now and then that means you are doing so well, when really that's not. I mean, I hate to derogate, or it seems like I'm derogating like the hard work of people, but success is not being able to like live in reasonable conditions and being able to do something nice for yourself and your family every now and then. And I think that that's one of the hardest things that we would have to one of the harder things we would have to overcome as a movement, because it's so personal to so many people. And to say, oh well, sorry, the fact that you can't go, that you get to go to Disneyland with your family once a year, that's not really success in the sense of, well, relative to what it could hypothetically be if we were to implement things like free college, free healthcare, universal income, like that sort of thing.
I think
So that's what that made me think of.
True. Oh, sorry, talking over.
I have a question. So, are there any examples where socialism has been successfully implemented? Like I know in European countries, say Denmark, Netherlands, they have much better social programs in terms of work-life balance, childcare, maternity leave, but they still have a capitalist country.
Yeah.
So how do you think that is different from socialism?
Yeah.
Um, go ahead. You can
Do you
talk.
want to go with CJ?
I can kind of touch on it. Part of the issue is specifically when referring to European countries, you're all right that they are still capitalists because they don't remove the fundamental relationship between workers and capitalists. As far as successes, Vietnam is a good case study. Cuba is a good case study. Yugoslavia is a good case study.
But
Um,
they're not developed countries, right?
they're not what countries?
They're not developed countries. They are still developing.
They are still developing. They're not fully developed. We don't quite have any examples, as far as I know, of a fully developed socialist country. If anyone wants to correct me on that, but one of the issues you get into that is with government in the relationship to capitalists. One of the points is that the government's position is to secure business interest through foreign policy, and we've seen time and again the U.S. get involved in developing countries that are trying to be socialist and undermining their efforts in doing so.
Yeah, and also to piggyback on that, like what's developed and what's developing or global south, the ravages of colonialism, so that exploitation for northern capitalists, like, in places like India, at the continent of Africa, Latin America, have been very exploited, and been very drained of its resources, and they have not been able to take their capital or their labor or surplus to help develop them into better countries. Um, yeah, so that's
Well,
also another issue.
but why? But like, is there not a single example where socialism has been successful? Because why is that it's most socialist countries turn into authoritarian countries? It
It's
usually,
Catalonia.
I'm not a critic, I'm just trying to understand why this always happens. Because there's one example, Jamestown massacre, if you could remember, he touted it as a socialist utopia, but then it ended up being a very rigid authoritarian, and then and then it led to suicide of around 900 people.
There are two examples that come to mind in terms of very non-authoritarian socialist regimes.
Mm-hmm.
There's Catalonia, and a bit more controversially, there's the Free Territory of Ukraine.
Okay.
Those are two anti-authoritarian socialist experiments. They were both crushed, but they were successfully able to be both anti-authoritarian and very much so socialist.
Okay. But the idea of socialism is that everything is state controlled, right?
No,
No.
no.
So who controls this? Who controls the process?
The workers individually, or rather collectively, the workers control it rather than it being centralized in a private system. Socialism is still supposed to be democratic. There's still supposed to be a
Mm-hmm.
democracy. But as far as economically, all we're doing is expanding democracy in the economic sector rather than allowing private individuals to decide um, most, if not all, affairs.
So is democratic socialism different from the conventional socialist ideas?
Somewhat.
How is so basically you're democratic socialist, right? Is democratic socialism different from the other pre-existing socialist ideas, or
A lot more focus on decentralization,
okay?
not from what I've read from like the DSA's website and from what I like pick up from other democratic socialists, our the goal is not to institute a Marxist Leninist type regime.
Mm-hmm.
So that, yeah,
Our goal is to have like workers directly control like maybe different firms. There to be like universal health care and universal education, but like not like, you don't have Gauss plan controlling every single facet of the economy. You have a very decentralized, very municipalist view of things. And there are successful examples of this that are kind of like adjacent to this ideal.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And Oedipus Rex.
Oh, well, just Sweden comes to mind off the top of my head. The Canadian system is somewhat of a socialist system. I mean, there are all kinds of successful socialist democracies that I mean, off the top of my head, Iceland, Denmark. I'm
Yeah.
not certain about Norway.
Yeah.
I don't know. If somebody mentioned that I had to go feed the cat, but he was asking for examples of successful socialist
Uh,
democracies.
they are
Successful
not
socialist.
socialist. They have good social programs. Those governments are still essentially capitalist. But why the European countries have such good economics, at the same time they have very strong social programs like universal healthcare, free education. In
Yeah.
Germany, everything's free, but why America has not been able to do that despite being the most
Well, that's a fair
powerful country?
question. I mean, I thought that more or less that's what this group is aiming for, like what Sweden has. It's not to take over like a collective as they did in the Soviet Union to collectivize everything. That wasn't my understanding. But even if it is, I'm trying to keep an open mind. But you make very valid points. I don't know why the United States can't do it. And at 64 years old, I want to see something different.
So yeah, we have a very long, drawn out anti-labor, strong history with the FBI in this country, and also the role of unions turning into business unions instead of worker rank and file unions. One of the reasons there are good so there's democratic socialism and social democracy.
Hmm.
So the countries in Northern Europe are social democracies. They still operate in a capitalist framework, but there's a large welfare state. And this was won through class formation, through workers' parties like labor parties. That's why Britain has the NHS.
Hmm.
So yeah, it is through class struggle, and they have made it very hard to do in the United States, but it is an issue of becoming a class formation, and that's why in those Northern European countries they were able to get concessions from the capitalist class.
And one thing to keep in mind with that as well is, especially specifically looking at Britain, it is a constant fight, which is why, in my opinion, collectivism is the only way to go, because the NHS currently, the struggle in England is that it is continuously being more and more privatized. They're moving closer to a system that the U.S. has rather than strengthening their single payer, which is part of why a lot of people in the UK will opt to slam the NHS rather than defend it because it's getting worse.
Any other questions or comments?
Dylan here. Just some of the conversation there, and I will say it is a struggle for me to fully parse out. At times, the words seem quite meaningless. Socialism, capitalism, communism, to liberal, to conservative. That being said, ours is probably at the modern day the closest thing to a free market capitalist society. But there are still institutions that go to other folks. What I think of though is cooperative ownership. It has been demonstrated on small scale throughout many different countries where small groups or even large industries, labor has a profound seat at the market. And our society looks very much at the commodities market, what sells, as opposed to giving any emphasis on where where people interact in getting jobs. And the focus for me, the idea of putting more weight and like the labor being human beings, deserving far more voice than what is being sold. But it's the supply side economics of voodoo Reagan economics, the inverse of that.
Mm-hmm. And anyways, I redropped some links for Blue Ridge Bigger Than Bernie that is happening Tuesday, January 26th. So not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday at 6 p.m. You can register there. And the DSA Yellowfinch with NRV DSA. Well, anyways, I don't think, I think we're good for this evening. I don't want to keep anybody for way too long. Anything else? Any announcements? We got some people from VTYDSA and also Virginia Western.
I have one. What's happening on the? Oh, I think it was Saturday. Something about Saturday I missed. Nick came in like getting the call, but you were talking about discussions and stuff.
I told those kids about that. People get sick like that. LB gotta go first.
What was that question?
I think they were asking about what we were doing on Saturday.
We're doing a cleanup of a site in Roanoke County in the Glenver area.
Okay, I don't have a ride there, so I don't know if I'll be able to make it there.
You can text about it.
Okay.
You guys did a good job.
I was gonna say the same thing. It was really well done and really informative.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Yep.
Thank you, and thank you for speaking, Dylan, Joseph, and Ben.
Thank you for speaking.
For seeing CJ.
Meeting
Job,
tomorrow,
Joseph.
the third Monday of every month, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
And we'll
7 o'clock.
a link.
You don't have to ma'am me. I'm Kay. Ma'am is my mother. She's much older.
Also, I just dropped my email in the chat. So if there are any of you either in the Roanoke area who are of college age or are attending Virginia Western and want to learn more about this within a community of fellow students, I strongly urge you to reach out to me and I will give you all of the information. Also, Xander just dropped the general VWCC YDSA email. So just email one of those available to you right now. And we would love to give you the information to help get you oriented into our group and learn more about this stuff.
Anything from Virginia Tech YDSA?
Thank you so much for holding this. This was great.
Yes.
Yep.
And you all are welcome to, anybody who wants to make this presentation to their own group, I will help share it and you can ameliorate it to all you all's needs. So anyways, with that, I am going to get off. I feel like I'm tired and so are many of you all, but thank you so much. Thank you for the people who went on this, and I look forward to doing more organizing. This is just the beginning. I am so excited about what we are able to do. Thank you so much, and you all have a pleasant evening. The only thing we have to lose is our chains. Good night.